Welcome everyone to the show, Combustible Elements, real talk for real people. Here we try to put different ideas and perspectives together in a pot, heat it up, and get an explosion of knowledge and understanding. We understand that problems can only be fixed starting from the bottom to the top, building a great foundation for change and improvement. I'm Big Mel, and I'm joined by Ruben, aka the Monarch, and Aaron, the Hitman. Let's get started. So our topic this week, we're going to talk about something that is important in family structures now, maybe more so because of this day and age and how we view families and how families are viewed as far as more than one working parent. So we're going to talk about blended families, how these things affect the blended family from your experiences into our society today. For those that don't know what a blended family is, a blended family is a topic that really came into fruition maybe a couple years ago because it wasn't no blended family before. You either was a family and that was it. You know, a blended family now is if someone has other kids and then you get into a relationship with them and your families merge. Either you have kids, you don't have kids, but there's multiple parents in those relationships. And sometimes they can be, what's the word, complicated. So we're going to talk about that topic. Me personally, I feel because I'm a little bit older. So in my generation, even though I come from a blended family, it wasn't really called a mixture of family. So as far as my history goes, my father had other children before he married my mother. And my mother, I do have a half sister. My mother had a daughter from a previous marriage before she started having a set of kids with my father. So I'm just blended from all over the place. But back in those days, I can remember that my mother took my half sisters in. I don't know what the story was. I do, but I'm not going to say it. But they ended up staying with my father, which meant they stayed with my mother, which meant they stayed with his family that he was having presently. You know, it can be a difficult situation because you have kids being raised differently, and then now they all together. Some kids have different relationships as far as with how they're raised, usually with different mothers, different fathers, whoever they're primarily around. So that affects their interaction between each other. I can tell you right now, blended families work better when everybody's grown. It doesn't really work that well when they're all like adolescents. Sometimes it all depends on how it's handled. Uh, During those times, you were just family, so it just didn't matter. But Aaron, you're a little bit younger than me. You probably have a different perspective. What do you think about the topic of blended families?
So, I mean, like you said, it was called something different back in the day. It was like step families. Like you had a stepmom and a stepdad, and probably stepbrothers and sisters. But now they use the word blended families, and then it's bonus moms for instead of stepmom, and then bonus dad instead of stepdad.
Haven't
But it,
heard those topics. Bonus.
yeah, and then you
Haven't
got
heard
you
that.
got bonus children, so they make it sound a little more catchy, a little more appealing. But yeah, me growing up, I have three brothers from my mom, and I have two brothers from my dad. But two other brothers besides. So um, growing up, it was me and my two older brothers with from my mom and my dad. And then they got divorced, and then my mom had another son with my stepdad, and then my dad had two more sons with my stepmom. But then my stepmom already had a son and a daughter, so they was my stepbrother and stepsister. But we all grew up together, and for me, I don't call them my stepbrothers or stepsister. Like they my brother and sister. Like we grew up together, we bonded together. So we did have a blended family. It was a little trying at times, only because I feel like some parents try to make you pick sides when it's blended families, and you know, you like, you can't have too much fun at your dad house and then go back home to your mom and tell her how much fun you had, or vice versa. So it's like,
Now, I didn't want to start off and mention that, but
hey,
we got to deal with that topic because it's real in our society. I'm
yeah,
sorry to cut you off. Continue.
yeah. So like right now, I have a blended family. I have three kids from my previous marriage, and the partner that I'm with now, she has two boys. So we have five boys all together, and you know, we're working on this whole blended family thing like right now. So I mean, again, it's different, is something new, but at the same time, like something that you mentioned, like the parenting styles, like people have different parenting styles. So you kind of have to integrate both parenting styles together in order to make like a hybrid parenting style. Or, I mean, it's not even just two parenting styles, because you know, you have kids over. I have kids again with my ex-wife, and I have kids over here that you know, have the parent. And when we have all the boys together, like right now, like, you know, we have to integrate our parenting styles together in order to cultivate the type of environment that you want to have with all of the kids together, and help them um, integrate together as best as possible.
Well, now you said two parenting styles, but actually listening to you is really three.
Yeah,
It's
three so far.
your style, your present partner style, your ex-wife style, and then your style. It's like three styles, and then you got to figure out a way to like get on the same page or the same line or the same degree or the same mentality. And I think that runs into problems. And it may not just be because the parenting styles are so different. I think it may be different because the people are different, and then all the other stuff that might be brought into it, like relationship goals or misses or endings. You know, sometimes our past experiences, they all get brought into it, and then that affects how people look at things. And I think it's more prevalent. And I'm not just talking about in you or anybody in particular, but I think it's just more prevalent in our society today that all those other elements get brought in when they shouldn't be brought in, because the situation is the situation. If the parents are actually dealing with each other and trying to do what's best for the kid or children, then that's what they're trying to do. So all those other elements that's sometimes bleed into the situation really shouldn't even bleed into the situation. Ruben, what's your experience on this topic?
I mean, I never, when it comes to blended family, um, I think if both parents make the decision to have it as natural and as, I guess you could say, normal as possible, then the kids will never even know or realize that they're even part of a blended family. But that decision got to come early on, and depends. I guess it also depends on like what age you enter in the child's life when we talk about a blended family. So, personally, for me, I don't like the term stepdad, stepmom, stepkids, because it's almost like it it kind of takes away. I feel like from you know, the value of a parent. Like if you're a parent, you're a parent. You know,
Yeah.
if you're raising that kid, if you're raising that child, you know, boy or girl or whatever. In some cases, you got people that's been in the child's life since they were, you know, 1 or 2 years old or 3 or 4 years old, and that child may be a full grown adult now, and they're like, yeah, that's my stepdad. What step did I miss? You know, and being your dad, as to be referred to as a stepdad, if I've been in your life 15, 16, 17 years, like, you know, in some cases, you may not even know who your actual father is, or mother for that matter. Like it, parenting is it's a full-time job. And if somebody takes that on and they take it on full time, there shouldn't be a step title in it. As far as, you know, the term that he used as far as bonus and all that other stuff, I just don't. Those labels are still somewhat for me, tacky in the sense of like, yo, if you don't want to tell people, your business, you don't have to. Like, yo, that's my kid. Hey, listen, that's my son, that's my daughter. They don't look like you, but hey, it be times where you have kids that don't look like you. Everybody don't gotta know everything that's going on. As long as that child is happy, and as long as you guys are in a good situation and it works for your family, then that's all that matters.
Now, you brought up 2 points because you know me, I'm always listening, always coming up with some stuff to throw back at you and see what you say. So I'm gonna throw back 2 things at you. The first thing you said, age was a factor, I guess, as far as the child goes.
Yeah.
What exactly did you mean by that? I have an idea, but I just want you to clarify so everybody else has an idea.
In some situations, you might, somebody might get together, and one of the two may have kids who are young, of extremely young age. Sometimes it could be a year old or 2 years old or whatever. In that particular situation, that child, if you're in that person's life, 1, 2 years old, or even 3 years old, you're all that child's gonna know in most cases. You know what I mean? So how are we using a step term, for the mom or the dad?
We're gonna get to that in a minute. Go ahead.
For the mom or the dad, when you've already been in their child's life, their whole life. What's the purpose of that term? I don't. Now, back in the day, they called people bastard kids if you was, a child out of wedlock or something like that. But that was also an insult. So I wrap up the stepfather and stepmother term somewhat like an insult in a way. If you've been in a child's life long enough, like, I guess if you got 2 grown folks getting together and they got grown kids, then I guess you could say that's your stepchild, or you could just say, yeah, that's my marriage, that's my child by marriage or whatever. You know what I mean? As opposed to saying stepchild. I just got an issue with the whole step word, like,
okay,
step parent,
so
stepmom, stepdad.
I can tell you from a personal perspective, a lot of times that's used, but it's not the child that dictates that. It's the parents.
It's the parents. Yeah, I know. Absolutely.
And it's usually the biological person, or maybe another person is still interacting with their kid, whether it's on a major level or a minor level. And then they start giving pressure because they like, I'm your dad or I'm your mom. So once again, a lot of the problems that come with blended families come from the adults. The adults be acting like the kids.
Well, that's the adults not being mature. You know what I mean? And listen, if you're not full time, then that means somebody else is also is splitting their time. So, you shouldn't have to pressure the child saying, yo, that's your step anything. The child knows.
They should make that determination during the course of their life.
The child knows.
Their decision.
The child knows who they're gonna call and refer to as what, based on their relationship with that person. Kids know.
That is true, but once again, you brought up age before, so it all depends on how old they are. Like when you were saying the optimal situation 1, 2, or 3. When you start talking about 14, 15,
I mean, again, at 14, 15, depending on what type of childhood that kid had before, those first 14 years, if you come in and it's a situation where like it's a real life improvement type of deal, that child's not gonna be calling you mom or dad within a year, but give it 2, 3 years. If that child understand, like, yo, like, I remember where I was at this point in my life, and I see the change from this point to that point, they ain't got no problem. They're not gonna have a problem calling you mom or dad, because again, kids know. They understand. They know what they know what the situation is. They're aware. Like we tend to overlook the maturity level of kids a lot of times because we're like, man, they're a kid. They don't know what's going on. I know I was very aware at a young age, from a very young age. So like I always want to make sure I respect kids' opinions, and their thought process, and how they react to things.
Now, my opinion on a lot of these things, or as far as how these blended families get started, sometimes that dictates what's going on. I mean, me personally, when I was a younger man, I didn't want to meet your kids. Like, I never really dated, even though I'm in a blended family now. I never dated you when you were a parent and had a kid. But I didn't date because of the responsibilities. I didn't date because if you didn't do you didn't put your kid first, I would never put you first. You see what I'm saying? Like, I would sit down and watch what you do. So as an example, oh, let's go out and do this and such. I'll see if I can find a babysitter last minute, or I'll leave the baby in the house and then I'll come out to the car or something like that. Right there, nah, we're done. Because my thing would be, what would you do if I had kids with you? You know what I mean?
Same thing.
And, right. So that was my little test on it, and then I was like, well, this may not be for me until I met my wife. But by that same token, I don't think people like really take the time necessary to get to know people to see if that's what they really want to do. And I think that leads to a lot of problems. Aaron, you've been quiet for a while because I've been talking to Rude. What do you think about these topics?
I mean,
Subtopics.
as far as what you just said, it before I reached the point that I'm at now, like I really didn't care if you had kids, and I like I come before everybody. So I mean, they ain't my kids.
Hey man, at least you're being honest, man. At least it's a safe space. Safe space.
That was back in the day though. Like, I'm more mature now, and like I value I mean, after having kids, like my whole mentality on that might have changed a little bit, but I mean, definitely like the way kids are being raised now, and like to see the things that they go through. I mean, you should take into consideration, like, if you're going to be with somebody and they have kids, you either all in or you not. Like, you can't just be with the individual without being with their kids. And
Absolutely.
That's true. And I'm gonna cut you off for a second.
Okay.
But by that same token, that's from the person coming into that situation. From the person that's in that situation, their determination should be what's good for us. Because if that person ain't good enough for you, they shouldn't be good enough for your kid.
No,
You see what I'm saying?
So like that goes for like me. Like I said, I have 3 boys, but like if I don't feel like that this person is going to add value to my kid's life, then we not rocking out together. Like, if this person is willing to take on some sort of responsibility, meeting my kids and being around my kids, you have to add value to their lives. You can't be like out here like me. I don't curse a lot. I curse like around my brothers and stuff like that, but I definitely don't curse around my kids.
It's around me too. I don't want to hear that.
Curse around my homies. But it's not something that like, I'm not trying to like hide that part of myself from my kids, but like I just, that's just not the type of language that I use around my kids. So like I would expect the same type of respect coming from my partner, and just carry yourself in a proper way that's going to add value to my kids.
Well, now see, I'm glad that you said that, because for you to have that point of view and for you to say that you would want your partner to do the same thing, that means you had these conversations, in the beginning, in the early stages, like what was acceptable and what was not. This is your parenting style. This is your parenting style. This is what we want to do collectively. But a lot of people don't do that. And that leads to a lot of problems with that. And then there's also a factor of, if one of those parents has been raising those kids by themselves with no help. So now they're more guarded in their relationship. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't. Like, I'll be the first one to say, if you're dating somebody, it's probably better not to meet the kids for a long period of time. You know what I mean? Until you become instilled in their life. Because sometimes it's hit and miss. That person might be gone in like a couple weeks or a couple months, and then that leaves a lasting impression on the kids that we're finding out now. Even the kids didn't know until they got older and how they chose people. But it makes a difference if someone's been isolated with just them and their kids and they didn't have any help, and then somebody comes in and that person may be like really good with what they need and willing to accept whatever baggage may have come to it. I hate to use the word baggage, but it is a word. This is something there. You know, if you're dealing with somebody with kids, it matters if the kids all have the same parent, if the kids have different fathers, because you just got to do the numbers. You know, that's two different, say it's two different kids, it's two different fathers. You know what I mean? Two different grandmas, two different moms, two different pop-pops, two different aunts with their kids. And so you're not really coming into the family. You coming into the family plus another family plus another family. Like you coming in, numbers come up to like 15 to 20 that you have to deal with, and everybody's looking at you to see what you're doing is right and wrong. Even though they're not in the situation, there's always pressure from outside of it. So my question really is, do you think because there's so many single parents now and they've been alone, as far as when I say alone, I mean like in serious relationships, very few and far between, does that make it harder for a blended family to start? Because that person that's coming in that situation and that parent mom may not carry as much weight. What do you think, guys?
You want to answer first, Ruben, or?
No, go ahead.
All right. For me, I don't, not to, well, to be blunt about it, like I don't care what everybody else say. Like if me, like you said, if me and my partner are communicating and we agree that our parenting styles are integrating well, and she's okay with me reprimanding her kids, and I'm okay with her reprimanding my kids. I don't care what her baby dad has to say or what her
I'm
mom.
gonna cut you off for 1 second because this is an important portion that you just said. Reprimanding them. So everybody listening, reprimanding them and whipping their ass are two different things. Because a lot of people don't realize that. Like if you're with somebody else's kid and they get ready to run across the street and get hit by a car and you don't drag them back so they don't get hit and they get ran over, everybody's gonna wonder why you didn't drag them back. But by that same token, if you tell that kid the next time you do that, I'm gonna take you home and let your mom get you or whatever, I'm gonna pull you back so hard you're gonna go flying through the air or something. That is not a negative. That's a positive because
Well,
that person is looking out for your child. But I'm
there's also
sorry,
a
I
thin
cut.
line. That's a fine line, as you're saying. There's a fine line between reprimand and disciplining your kid and the kid, and being an abusive person. So it's like, because we have such a history of like people typically when they were trying to reprimand the kids, they do it in such a harsh and almost military manner.
That's different.
You can't.
That's why I use that example. That's different. I use that example because that was an
Well,
example of just parenting skills. Now we're going to talk about the abuse that some parents have came into their lives and have done. That's like a whole slew of things because sometimes that other person that they're in that blended family know what the hell they doing and don't say nothing about it.
I think Ruben's talking about more like verbal abuse. So
yeah, and that's why I was gonna go with that too. Yeah, you're right. I was talking about physical and also verbal abuse because a lot of times you may not necessarily put a hand on somebody, but the words that you say to them, the words that they hear all the time, the words that you repeat to them, those things cut. They cut deep. And people, we always hear people saying, oh, it's only words, they don't hurt. Like, no, words are powerful, man. Affirmations, if you saying the right affirmations to somebody, that can make or break that person, through in the course of their lives. So that's why, I mentioned before that like my father showered me with positive affirmations, and I make sure I do the same thing to my kids. So now it's to the point where like, somebody on the outside might be like, oh, these kids is cocky as hell. But no, they confident because I make sure I tell them they great. So like, and in a relationship, if it's a blended family, if the child is not being showered with, the right affirmations and being cared for, I mean, caring for somebody is a start, but there's different levels of care. So you got to make sure you have that, proper level of care for that, coming from all angles, for the child, for the parents, and everything else. So this way, there are a lot of those positive affirmations. There isn't any type of verbal abuse. There isn't any name callings and things like that, and saying things like, "Yeah, you remind me of such and such. That's why you just like such and such," and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think Ruben caught my last video that I did the other day about affirmations.
I, I, I mean, no, it's just for me. Like I didn't grow up in a blended family. My father and my mom had me, and then they had my brother and my sister and everything. But like, I also didn't get to grow up with my dad my whole life, so it got abruptly stopped, and then I was living with my aunts and uncles. So that's not a blended family. That's just, I guess it's a different mixture of it. But it's not like my mom was remarried and I was young, and she eventually got remarried, but I was already an adult. My father also got remarried, but again, I was already an adult by the time they each got remarried. But like, I didn't grow up with a different person that was my dad living with me. I had uncles and cousins and stuff, but it's not the same as like, you like watching, you with one person and then you watch that person go, and then now it's a whole other person that you got to deal with, and there's a whole different set of rules and a whole different set of everything that you're used to. And now you got to rearrange your life. You got to rearrange how you used to doing things. And this person wants you to do this. And, meanwhile, you were already used to doing things how your dad did them or how your mom did them. So now it's a whole adjustment. And in some cases, you might resent that person. You're like, yo, like, man, you ain't even my dad, or you're not even my mom. Like, you go over here messing up the groove because you want to have things your way, make it things comfortable for you. It ain't comfortable for me. So, because my father was a child advocate as a lawyer, I've always been somewhat of somebody that I like to think of the kids, their feelings, and how I would have reacted as a child if I had to go through some of those changes. So I'm super mindful of that.
Now it's good that you didn't have to go through that as a child. Aaron had to go through it. I had to go through it as far as you said in the living structure, how I had to go with that as a child. But I'll give you another scenario what I had to go through as a child. So my mom never remarried, never had to deal with another man, really. After she split with my father, but my father had a whole nother family. You know what I mean? So it was like, now you got to deal with them, and you don't know what's the best course. You know what I mean? You had to deal with his new wife. And she was always nice to me. She looks at me as like one of her sons or whatever. I mean, I love my sisters and my brothers. After the point, never had a problem with them, but it makes a difference because the way the relationship ended, my mom was bitter, and she should have been bitter about how the relationship ended, not getting into that. However, there was a separation between kids and dads, our kid and dad, because of how that relationship ended. You know what I mean? And then you bring courts, got involved in a lot of situations. So when I say sometimes blended families and then getting out of blended families, it's like multiple dynamics that we never even touched on in this conversation right now. I'm sorry, excuse me. Back to your point about the affirmations. I gave you that scenario, but in that scenario, I'm putting me in that scenario. So me, if I'm dealing with somebody and they have a child, I'm trying to like give them affirmations, make them feel comfortable because I'm looking at it from their perspective because I've been in their perspective. So I just brought that up because there are a lot of situations where people don't think that you're a part of that. If you're a part of that, you either all in or you all out. And like I said, I think it started off with talking with Aaron about if you're with your significant person and you talk about this stuff ahead of time. I think a lot of times people don't talk about this stuff before they get blended, which leads to you finding out stuff on the fly. You know what I'm saying? That's like that old adage: you never know somebody till you live with them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That goes to deal with like parenting styles too, because a person can actually seriously and legitimately talk to you about their parenting styles, but until you actually see it, because really, when they give you that information, it's always the condensed version anyway. You're having a conversation, but it's always condensed in the conversation. You're trying to put as much information in a short amount of time, kind of like we're doing now. We're trying to put as much information as we can in a short amount of time. And then a lot of times, some things fall through the cracks. Some things that are not seen by that person as like deception or leaving something out intentionally, or just because they just didn't think about it because they just do it naturally. So, Aaron, where do you put the communication before you decide to go into a blended family on the list of hierarchy? Like, is it at the top of the list? Did
Yeah,
that require like a major conversation?
I think it's definitely at the top of the list, and it's a conversation that you always have to revisit, no matter how long you guys are together. Like you should always constantly be in communication, especially when it is in reference to your kids or their kids, y'all kids together, because they have kids and then you have kids and then y'all have a kid together. Then every is it's a game changer. So you still have to be in constant communication because the kids' behavior change when they start getting around other kids, and then when you start being able to parent them, their behavior changes. So it's always like an ebb and flow. So you're like always in a constant state of conversation with each other. So that should always be at the top of the list. And I just wanted to
Yeah,
point
now see, I want
Ruben was
go
right.
ahead. I'm
Uh,
sorry, go ahead.
Verbal abuse is much more detrimental to a person than physical abuse. The scars on your body, you see them. You don't see the scars on the inside, the mental scars that you take on through verbal abuse. But go ahead.
I hope that wasn't a shout out at me.
No, I'm
This is
just
my
saying.
comment earlier.
No, I'm just saying everybody should be mindful of their words, even when you're talking to adults. Like you need to be mindful of the things that you say and how you say it, the tone of your voice, things like that, because that does matter.
Okay, and I agree with you 100%. I'm just playing with you. Um, I do want to touch on one last thing, and then we're gonna talk a little bit more. The last thing I wanted to touch on is like my own experience for people that are like on the outside being in. Like I've never been on the outside of a blended family, but the people that I've dealt with on the outside, because I said I had an older sister from my mom with a previous marriage. That man took me to go get my driver's license. The first time I failed, that's a whole funny story. Took me back the second time, helped me get two of my first two cars. He treated me like I was one of his kids, and I wasn't. My older sister was one of his kids, but he was like force demanding that you're part. We all family. You know what I mean? You got a half brother. We all family. And then my father was like that with his daughter too. Like that's his daughter. You can't say half, none of step. But he don't want to hear that shit. That's his kid. Um, I think a lot of times the parents on the outside sometimes make the situation worse. So my only comment about that is, if you're on the outside, don't be an asshole. You know, try to work with it because it's your child involved in it. Now we're gonna take a minute apiece. We're gonna go to the portion of the show. Who's to blame? We'll start off with Aaron. Who's to blame for people not understanding blended families, and what would be the one thing that you would do to help somebody that's listening? You have 60 seconds.
Who's to blame? I guess our parents and the way we were brought up is to blame if you happen to be in the blended family or seeing people in the blended family, and if you're part of a blended family or not. I mean, if you just know how to parent, you should just talk to other parents, have conversations like this about parenting skills. It doesn't even have to be a blended family, because some of our regular families, quote unquote, are not doing as well. So, I mean, society is to blame. We're to blame, and we should be able to talk to each other and help each other be able to raise our kids in better environments.
Ruben, 60 seconds.
I'm gonna blame the parents. I feel like if you're getting into a situation or a relationship with somebody that has kids already, and or both people have kids, there's got to be an understanding, like Aaron mentioned, and not on. There's got to be an understanding when you first get in, and you got to continue revising that understanding, as the relationship continues. Just so there are boundaries, there are rules and regulations. There's a plan set in place, and you actually follow through with said plan on how you're gonna raise that child, how you gonna put together to raise this kid, what we're gonna expose them to, and things of that nature. So if the parents don't put together a proper plan, if failure to plan, and that's gonna result into not having the best relationship that they can have with that child, and not giving their child everything that they could possibly give them to properly flourish in that blended relationship or that blended family.
Okay, well, for me, who's to blame for blended families not working? I'm gonna go totally off. I'm not gonna say it's the parents totally. I'm not gonna say it's the kids in it. I'm gonna say it's society. And the reason I'm gonna say our society and financial structure is we all know that you have a lot of single parent homes. We all know that our homes that are multi-parent homes, you have to have two parents that work to provide for your kids. I think people would see more so the worth of a blended family or another parent coming in if one of them didn't have to work and they were the provider of their kid the majority of the time. Like you could see that years ago. So if you don't know what they're doing because they never around your kid, then your kid's not coming back and telling you, hey, this is working because I feel a certain way because one parent is around. We all family because you don't see everybody. So I think finances and our social structure now, where money plays a part and really decentralizes what goes on in kids. But we're up against the wall for time. I want to thank everybody for joining us this week. This is a serious topic. Thank you, Aaron the Hitman, for your insight. Ruben, for your insight. Ruben the Monarch, thank you once again. I'm Big Mel. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.
Peace.
Peace.